In the 1950s, engineers designed a plane that flew so high, enemy air defenses couldn't reach it. But that advantage didn't last for very long. In the 1960s, engineers used speed to gain the upper hand by designing a plane that flew so fast the enemy couldn't catch it. But that advantage was also called into question. So in the 1970s, they'd try a radical new approach. They'd build a plane the enemy couldn't detect, a plane engineered to be invisible. Since the Second World War, radar has been a foundation of air defense systems. By transmitting radio waves into the atmosphere and listening for signals that bounce back, enemy aircraft could be detected more than 100 kilometers away, long before they could be seen or heard. The technology fundamentally changed military conflicts. As a general rule, the larger the plane, the easier it is to pick up on radar, as more radio waves bounce back to the receiver. But even smaller planes generate enough radar signature to make them easy to detect. In an effort to mask the signature, engineers tried to develop special radar-absorbing materials and paints, and incorporated flattened or tapered shapes into an aircraft's design. But none of these proved to be particularly effective at evading radar. And by the 1970s, sophisticated radar-based air defenses were posing a huge threat. During the Vietnam War, surface-to-air missiles and radar-aided artillery led to the loss of thousands of American aircraft. And it was a similar story during the Yom Kippur War, where, in a matter of days, over 100 Israeli aircraft were downed by radar-guided missiles. Minimizing radar detection would be crucial in any future conflict. But it wasn't clear how to do it, or if it would even be possible. In the early 1970s, an engineer at Lockheed came across groundbreaking research. A paper published over a decade earlier with mathematical formulas detailing precisely how electromagnetic waves reflected off objects, and how, with the right shape, even a large object could be made to appear tiny on radar. The research was the work of a brilliant Soviet mathematician named Peter Ufimtsev, and incredibly, the Soviets overlooked the significance of his work, allowing it to be published internationally and translated into English. The research was a major breakthrough in understanding radio wave behavior, and its mathematical theories and analysis would be key to unlocking modern stealth technology. Recognizing the significance of Ufimtsev's work, Lockheed's engineers incorporated the formulas into sophisticated computer software. And for the first time ever, they could accurately predict radar cross-sections and determine which shapes would be virtually invisible to radar. But there was a problem. At the time, even the most powerful supercomputers couldn't handle complex calculations associated with curved surfaces. To get around these limitations, engineers used a technique called faceting. With it, smooth curvatures would be broken up into a series of simple flat surfaces, which could then be oriented to scatter radio waves away from a radar receiver. The groundwork for modern-day stealth technology was set. But building an aircraft to fly with such an unconventional faceted shape would be another challenge altogether. Lockheed's cutting-edge research got the attention of the United States Department of Defense, and in 1975 they were invited to compete against leading aerospace firms to develop a proof of concept for a stealth aircraft. Over the next few months, Lockheed refined their research into a concept more closely resembling an aircraft. And with its ultra-low radar cross-section, Lockheed won out over its rivals. Engineers would now have to build working prototypes, test beds to iron out the flying characteristics of the faceted shape, and to develop the many new technologies needed for low radar, infrared, visual, and acoustic observability. To accelerate development, engineers scavenged avionics, engines, and flight control systems from existing aircraft. To disguise the hard edges of the faceted shape, the prototypes were covered in a special camouflage paint scheme. In December of 1977, flight testing began under the highest level of secrecy at the notorious Area 51. The first prototype was used to develop a sophisticated fly-by-wire system needed to make such a radical-shaped fly. A second prototype would test stealth technology against ground-based radars and air-to-air missile guidance systems. The prototypes were so radical in their design, both were eventually lost in crashes. But the program was a resounding success, and the Air Force quickly underwrote the development of a production plane. Despite similarities in appearance, the production aircraft would be an entirely new design, much larger and more aerodynamically refined. The F-117 Nighthawk would be a new kind of attack aircraft, a plane designed to slip past air defenses undetected to conduct precision strikes. Externally mounted weapons would have emitted an obvious radar signature. Instead, the Nighthawk carried guided bombs in internal bays that could hold up to 5,000 pounds of ordnance. With a sophisticated computerized navigation and attack system, the Nighthawk could autonomously perform all aspects of a mission, including releasing its weapons without the pilots even touching the controls. The F-117 was about the size of a large fighter jet, but its radar cross-section was no bigger than a golf ball. And to minimize detection across other spectrums, engineers developed a range of other technologies to mask the aircraft's visual, acoustic, and infrared signatures. The Nighthawk wouldn't set records for speed, range, or maneuverability, but stealth would allow it to strike at the heart of even the most fierce adversary. For nearly a decade, the Air Force would keep the plane a closely guarded secret, denying that the F-117 even existed. But throughout the 80s, rumors stirred, with many speculating that the Air Force had instead developed a new undefeatable fighter jet, when in reality the F-117 was strictly a ground attack aircraft, and one that came with compromises. The Nighthawk carried no defenses or countermeasures, and lacked a radar system of its own, leaving pilots blind to the presence of enemy aircraft. Because afterburning engines would have increased the plane's infrared signature, the F-117 couldn't fly much faster than a commercial airliner. And for the first 8 years in service, the Air Force's new billion-dollar jets remained largely unproven. It wasn't clear how well stealth technology would work in an actual combat scenario.
ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. The deadline has come and gone. The Iraqis are living in what President Bush calls borrowed time. It is no longer whether the war will start, but when. They know that in Baghdad as well as in Washington, there is a rumor every hour.
On January 17, 1991, 10 F-117 Nighthawks were sent to do what no other aircraft in the world could: fly directly into the path of more than 4,000 anti-aircraft guns and surface-to-air missiles. The Nighthawks would use their stealth technology to slip through Iraqi defenses undetected, allowing them to strike key targets in Baghdad, which would clear the way for other military aircraft. When the Nighthawks started striking their targets, the Iraqis had no idea what hit them. Anti-aircraft fire lit up the skies, but the Iraqis were firing blindly into thin air. When it was all said and done, the F-117s returned back to their bases unscathed, while Saddam's once formidable air defense system had all but collapsed. The world's first stealth aircraft had made a stunning debut. The F-117 would play a critical role throughout the Gulf War, flying over 1,300 missions against some of the most dangerous targets in Iraq. The Nighthawk's overwhelming success earned it an almost mythical status. More than any aircraft in history, the F-117 became a cultural icon.
Hard to lock tone on something that ain't there, huh, good buddy?
Over the course of 2 decades, the Nighthawk would fly missions over Yugoslavia in 1999, Afghanistan in 2001, and Iraq once again in 2002. And despite flying thousands of missions, only a single F-117 would ever be lost in combat, shot down in an extraordinary set of circumstances when a surface-to-air missile managed to lock on to an open bomb bay door. As an aircraft developed in the 1970s, the Nighthawk had pushed technology to its limits, but subsequent increases in computing power allowed for later generations of stealth aircraft to incorporate curves into their designs. The Nighthawk proved so successful, the Air Force expanded its stealth capabilities to include a stealth strategic bomber in 1997, an air superiority fighter in 2005, and a multi-role fighter in 2015. With more capable stealth aircraft in the Air Force's inventory, the F-117 was finally retired in 2008. But after nearly 40 years since first taking flight, the F-117 continues to be one of the most iconic aircraft in history. A truly groundbreaking design that, even today, still seems like it's on the cutting edge.